Dead Sky Black Sun. Chapter 3. Blood. The stench of it filled his nostrils, overpowering and sickening, the bitter metallic taste catching in the back of his throat. His neuroglottis sifted hundreds of different blood scents, and the searing tang of burning flesh made his eyes water before his oculobe compensated and secreted a protective membrane across the surface of his eye. He blinked away the moisture, twisting in the grip of the sarcomata and trying to get a bearing on his surroundings. Despite what his eyes told him, he knew he must be seeing things, for the interior of the demon engine confounded his senses and flouted any notion of reality. It defied geometry, impossibly arcing beyond the limits of vision to either side, a sweltering red-lit hell cavern. A wide-doored firebox roared and seethed at one end of the chamber in long lines of dangling chains and pulleys, each with a limbless human torso skewered on a rusted hook, hung from the darkened and dripping roof. He and Pausanias were dragged past scattered mounds of human limbs, each piled higher than a battle tank, the flesh rotten and stinking. Two of the sarcomata slithered away from Uriel to lift a headless torso and thrust it into the firebox. They stoked the demon engine with flesh and blood, its belching stacks spewing ashen bodies into the air. The giant in the armor of the Iron Warriors dragged Pausanias behind it, the mighty sergeant helpless against such power. "No!" shouted Uriel, as the Omphalos demonium dropped its billhook and easily lifted Pausanias with one hand while reaching for an empty hook with the other. The iron giant took no notice of him and rammed the rusted hook into the backplate of Pausanias' armor, drawing a grunt of pain from him. Uriel struggled all the harder as he saw an empty hook hanging beside Pausanias, but the sarcomata held him firm, and he could not break their hold. Fleshy, wriggling hands lifted him high, and he gritted his teeth to stop himself from crying out as he too was spitted on a hook. The barbed point went through his armor and pierced his back. The sarcomata hissed and drew back, the lumpen growths beneath their exposed flesh rippling in monstrous hunger. The clang of mighty pistons echoed through the impossible structure, hissing spigots belching stinking clouds of oil-streaked steam, and iron-grilled furnaces flaring with blue and green flames. Moans and the creaking of molten metal mingled with the chittering glee of the sarcomata, and Uriel could imagine no more complete a vision of hell. The Omphalos demonium watched their futile struggles and stepped forward, gripping Uriel's jaw in one blackened gauntlet. Uriel could taste the ash on its fingers and smell the cooked meat beneath. The creature, was it an Iron Warrior or some demonic entity within the flesh of one? Uriel could not tell, and as it leaned close, its breath like the air from an exhumed grave, he kicked out, his boot ringing harmlessly from its ancient breastplate.
"You waste your energy, Ultramarine. It is not within your power or destiny to destroy me. Save your strength for the world of iron. You will need it."
"Get away from me, you bastard abomination!" shouted Uriel, struggling in his captor's grip, despite the fiery pain from the hook gouging his back.
"It is pointless to resist," said the Omphalos demonium. "I have traveled the blood tracks between realities for countless eons, and all things are revealed there. What has been, what is, and all the things that might be. I have snuffed out lives yet to be born, changed unwritten histories, and traveled paths no others may walk. And you think you can defy my will?"
"The Emperor is with us, yea, though we walk in the shadow," began Pausanias. The Omphalos demonium smashed a gauntleted hand across Pausanias' chin, swinging him wildly around and drawing a hiss of pain from him as the hook in his back dug deeper into his flesh.
"Prayers to your corpse of a god mean nothing here. His power has gone out of the world, and nothing now remains of him."
"You lie!" snapped Uriel. "The power of the Emperor is eternal."
"Eternal!" snarled the Omphalos demonium. "You would do well not to use such words so lightly until you have experienced such a span, trapped and helpless and tormented beyond reason."
The yellow eyes of the Omphalos demonium burned into Uriel's, and he saw the deathless rage and madness within them. Whatever the malign intelligence that lurked within the ancient suit of power armor was, it was clearly insane. the torments it spoke of having driven it into a depthless abyss.
"What are you?" said Uriel eventually. "What do you want with us?"
The Omphalos demonium released its grip, and turned from him as the Sarcomata began gathering up more body parts, and carried them towards the furnace, hurling legs, arms, and heads into the flames.
"That is unimportant for now,"
it said, pulling a thick chain that hung beside the firebox, and hauling on a rusted lever with a thick, rubberized handle.
"All that matters is that you are here, and that at this time our journeys follow the same path."
Uriel felt the impossible room judder as the lever was drawn back fully, the iron door they had been carried through shutting with a squeal of tortured metal. Pain flared in his back as the hook twisted between his ribs, and the massive demon engine began to move. Cadavers on other hooks swung on their jangling chains, and Uriel felt the familiar churning sensation in his belly of a warp translation. Was this infernal engine somehow capable of traversing the currents of the warp? Was that how it had managed to intercept Calth's pride within the treacherous shoals of the Immaterium? He knew not to dwell too long on such things. The asking of dangerous questions led to the path of deviation, the very thing that had seen them condemned to this fate. The churning sensation in Uriel's stomach grew, and he gritted his teeth against the growing pain. The Omphalos demonium turned from its labors and retrieved its billhook as the Sarcomata continued feeding the fires with corpses.
"Where are you taking us?"
hissed Pausanias through gritted teeth.
"Where you need to go," said the giant. "I know of your death oath and what has led you here. The Lord of Skulls has more artifice to him than simply the art of death."
"You are a demon," sneered Uriel. "You are an abomination, and I will see you destroyed."
"Your skull will be laid before the throne of the Blood God before that happens, Space Marine. I have already seen the manner of your death. Would you know of it?"
"The words of a demon are lies," shouted Pausanias. "I will believe nothing you say." The Omphalos demonium slashed its billhook around, the blade flashing towards Pausanias' neck. Blood welled from the shallow cut across the sergeant's throat.
"You seek death, Ultramarine, and I would gladly rend and tear your soul. I would rip your flesh screaming from your bones, and garland this body with your entrails. But your death is to be far worse than even one such as I could devise. Your skull will be honored with a place in one of the Bone Mountains within sight of the Blood God."
Another shudder, more intense, passed through the chamber, and Uriel felt as though red-hot skewers were being pushed through his skull.
"You should honor me, for you travel in ways no mortal has dared for eons."
The Omphalos demonium raised its arms to the ceiling and laughed.
"We travel the blood tracks. The heart of blood and the Demunculaba await."
And the demon engine roared into realms beyond existence. Uriel screamed. Space folded, the currents of the warp vanishing. The arena, the demon engine, the firebox, Pausanias, all disappeared, ripped away as if everything around him turned inside out and became meaningless concepts. He felt himself simultaneously explode into a billion fragments and implode within himself, compressed to a singularity of hollow existence. Faces floated before him, though as a dense ball of nothingness and a fragmented soul, he knew not how he recognized them. Worlds and people, people and worlds, flashing past in a seamless blur, yet each as clear as though he examined each one in detail. Time slowed, yet rushed, splintering crystals sounding from far off as fractured realities ground and shifted like tectonic plates. He saw the demon engine spiral through the cracks between dimensions, snaking a path that wound through the shifting glass shards of reality, existing outside of everything, traveling in the slivers of null space between all that was and all that ever could be. He saw worlds of choking fumes, people in walking comas shuffling from one banal day to another, gray and dead without even the awareness to scream at the frustration of their pointless lives. Worlds where twisting numbers fell upon mountains of implausibility before running in molten rivers of algorithms to a sea of integers. It was gone in a heartbeat, replaced by a towering world of mountains and seas, white, marble, and gold. Flames roared and seethed from every surface as the world burned, its people ashes on the wind, all life extinguished. Uriel, though he could no longer be sure he even knew who that was anymore, saw with mounting horror that he knew this world. He saw the fortress of Hera cast down, her once proud walls splintered and broken, the temple of correction no more than a shattered ruin. Demons made sport in the shrine of the Primarch, gnawing on his holy bones and defiling his sacred corpse. He wept at such vileness, furious at his helplessness and incapable of wreaking his vengeance upon those who had visited such wrath upon Macragge. Black, howling things closed on the demon engine, unseen, slithering guardians of nothingness worming their way through the cracks to close on them. The demon engine had traveled the blood tracks for millennia, and knew that these blind sentinels were no threat to its terrifying power. Such guardian creatures fed on the souls of those unwitting fools who breached this realm by accident, madmen who pored over forgotten lore and forbidden magics to unlock the gates between dimensions. Mortals who dared to travel to realms not meant for souls were devoured and made into yet more of the dark worms. The blood tracks carried the demon engine away from the toothless, questing mouths of the guardian creatures, its evil and power burning those that managed to approach too close. Clockwork worlds, worlds taken by evil, worlds of elemental madness, worlds of chaos, worlds of insanity, and worlds of arcing lightning. Everything was here. Every action that spawned a new realm of possibility could be found here, and Uriel felt the knowledge of such things fill him as he hung from his hook, bleeding and raw. The glue that held his fragile mind from sundering into pieces began to come undone. Awful knowledge of his insignificance of being and the pointlessness of action tore at his sense of who he was, and he desperately fought to hold on to his identity. He was Uriel Ventress. He was a warrior of the Emperor, sworn to defend his realm for as long as he lived. He was a space marine. His will was stronger, his purpose and determination greater than any other mortal man. He was in the belly of the beast, and he would fight its corrupting touch. He was... who? His existence flickered, and despite the protection of the demon engine, he knew the madness that claimed the minds of the ignorant fools who sought such places out was enfolding him. He struggled to hold on as shards of his life began spiraling away from him, each spawning fresh realities within this terrifying multiverse. Visions of potential and unwritten pasts floated past Uriel's eyes, and he gasped as he saw alternate histories slide past his eyes. He saw himself as a wrinkled ancient. He saw himself as a young man, lying prone on a simple cot bed in but one who was no longer, surrounded by grieving family members. Space Marine. He was a lean, here was his son, dark-haired like him, muscled farmer, toiling in the, but taller, and with the look of a warrior. Cavern farms on his home world of Uriel's heart swelled in pride and regret. Calth. His features were soft, and pride in his son, and regret tinged with great regret. That this vision of his life could never be. That this vision of his life could never be. Both faded from his mind, though he craved to see more of them, to know the consequences of his life having traveled the road not taken. But such was not to be, and other visions intruded on his sight. Pavonis, Blackbone Road, Tarsus Ultra, Medrengard? What were these? Names of places or people? Memories or invention? Had he journeyed to these places? Was he from them? Were they his friends? He could taste the meaning on every jagged syllable, but none made sense, though he knew he should recognize them. Except there was one that did not have the subtle flavor of recognition. One that tasted of dark iron, that reeked of ashen pollutants, burning oil, and echoed to the hammer of mountainous pile drivers and pistons of hellish engines. This world, that reality, was alien to him. Why now should it then intrude on his fracturing consciousness? It swelled in his perception, growing and filling what remained of his mind before it too vanished, and his mind began to collapse inwards. Nothing made sense anymore. All was dissolving into a morass of information. He could no longer hold on to anything coherent, feeling his thoughts blur and soften, running like 100 tributaries of 1,000 drivers that emptied seas of oblivion and welcomed it, knowing it would end this screaming madness in his head. An eternity or an instant passed through the could not tell which time was now, meaningless concept bereft of meaning and reference. A voice sounded amidst the insanity, and what little remained of Uriel Vern reached out and with the lifeline.
Fear not, Ultramarine, it said. This journey is like all mortal life.
The demon engine roared back into the realm of existence.
It ends.
Uriel drew breath, his heart's hammering fit to break his chest, his blood thundering around his body, and his face streaked with crimson that wept from his eyes and nose. He had bitten his tongue, and his mouth was filled with a coppery taste. He spat, tasting the reek of fumes and the acrid iron stench of industry. He lay still for long seconds as he tried to work out where he was. Above him was an unending vista of white without depth or scale, and he blinked, reaching up to wipe the congealed blood from his face. His hand passed before his face, and he was struck by a lurching sense of vertigo. He had a sudden sensation of falling and cried out, scrabbling around him for purchase. His hands closed on a fine shale of metallic shavings, and his vertigo vanished as he realized he was lying on his back and looking up into the sky. A dead sky, featureless and vacant without so much as a single cloud or speck to blight its horrid emptiness. He ached everywhere, his muscles weary to the point of exhaustion, and a searing pain in his back from where his flesh had been gouged by the hook. His thoughts tumbled over themselves as he tried to piece together what had just happened. He pushed himself upright, seeing Pausanias next to him, retching onto the metallic ground. His friend's face was drawn and hollow, as though the weight of the world had settled upon his shoulders.
"Get up,"
said a grating voice behind him, and a flood of memory filled Uriel's skull. Demon engine. He fought to stand, but his flesh was still adjusting to its return to existence, and he could only stumble to his knees. Before them stood the Omphalos Demonium, gigantic and monstrous in its blackened and ancient suit of power armor. Behind their captor was a shimmering, impossible rectangle of seething red light, a doorway back to the hellish interior of the demon engine. It carried its billhook and stood ankle-deep in the powdery shale of the ground. Their weapons, Uriel's sword and bolter together with Pausanias' pistol and flamer, rested against the rocks beside it. White reflections of the dead sky glittered on its shoulder guards, and it seemed to Uriel that the grinning, visored skull there burned with even more malice than before.
"You will need to restore your equilibrium soon, Ultramarines," said the demon thing with an echoing chuckle. "The delirium specters will hear the pounding beats of your hearts, and such morsels as you shall not go unnoticed for long."
"The what?" managed Uriel at last.
"Monsters," said the giant.
"Monsters?" repeated Uriel, gritting his teeth and finally climbing to his feet. Pausanias picked himself up and stood beside him, his face ashen but angry.
"The skins of murderers stitched across desecrated frames by the savage morticians, and filled with the mad souls of those who have died by their hands,"
explained the Omphalos Demonium.
"They hunt in these mountains, and you will know them by the cries of the damned at their heels."
"Where are we?" said Pausanias. "Where have you brought us?"
"This is Medringard, world of bitter iron,"
said the Omphalos Demonium, pointing at something behind the two Space Marines.
"Domain of the Daemon Primarch Perturabo. Can you not feel his presence on the air? The malice of a being who once walked with gods, and is now cast down to dwell beyond the realm he once bestrode. Look upon this ashen world and despair."
Uriel turned to where the Omphalos Demonium was pointing, the breath catching in his throat as he saw the desolate vista before him. They stood on a high rocky plateau above a sweeping gray hinterland of utter wretchedness. Far below them on the dismal steppe was a world of death. Uriel had thought the sweltering cavern of the demon engine had been a vision of hell, but it had been no more than a prelude to this soul-destroying desolation. Vast expanses of industrial heartland sprawled across the surface of the world. Steel skeletons of factories, mountains of coal and reddish slag, and mighty belching smokestacks. Flames burned from blasted refineries, the pounding of mighty hammers and the clangorous screech of iron on stone audible from hundreds of kilometers away. Uriel had seen pollution-choked hive worlds, planets teeming with uncounted billions who toiled ceaselessly in filthy smog and soot-choked death worlds, but they were garden paradises compared to Medrengard. He had even set foot on the iron surfaces of Adeptus Mechanicus forge worlds, the hallowed remains of the priests of the machine god. He had been awed by the scale of their pounding infrastructure, their every surface given over to colossal manufactorum and cathedral forges. But even the mightiest of these worlds was but a village smithy compared to Medrengard. Rivers of molten metal snaked like channels of lava, and evil clouds of smoke wreathed each tall tower and fanged chimney in a halo of lethal fumes. A vast, dark range of mountains towered over it all, blasted black rock where no living thing had ever lived or ever would. The peaks seemed to scrape the sky itself, the jagged stumps of the mountains a dozen or more times taller than the highest summit of Macragge. Uriel felt his blood chill as his eyes traveled up the terrifying heights of the enormous crags, seeing vile tendrils of noxious black smoke writhing from behind the mountains and clawing impossibly into the sky. Strange turrets reared beyond the peaks, and Uriel knew with awful certainty that some nightmare city lay concealed and brooding in the deep, dark valleys of that damnable mountain range. A city where walls and bastions spread across the ground and distant domes fouled the rock-like fungi after the rain. It was a hideous, dead-ringed outpost of malice that was rightly abhorred by all living things. Tarnished steeples and stained walls, deathly, weed-tangled spires, and empty halls were filled with limping and shuffling ghosts in rags who blindly obeyed the loathsome will of the city's diabolical master, the demon primarch Perturabo, lord and master of the Iron Warriors. Hate, whispered Uriel. So much hate and bitterness.
Yes, said the Omphalos Demonium. Imagine all the rank bitterness I smell within you, poisoned and grown strong by millennia of vengeful brooding, and it is still but the merest fraction of how much a living god can hate.
Uriel closed his eyes and shut out this nightmare vision, understanding that to take even a single step towards the dreadful city was to die, but its cyclopean immensity was etched forever in his mind such that nothing could ever remove it. The futility of existence in the face of this nameless horror was almost too great to bear, and he raised his eyes to the dead sky, its soul-destroying emptiness preferable to Perturabo's baleful city. The ghostly black tendrils squirmed through the sky, and he saw that they poured towards the solitary thing to stain its emptiness. A vast black sun, its surface so dark that its darkness was not simply the absence of color and light, but such that its fuliginous depth sucked all life and soul from the world. Pausanias wept at its horrible crushing weight, and Uriel was not surprised to find that he too shed tears at the sight of such an abomination against nature. "Emperor, protect us," he whispered. "This is—"
"Aye," said the Omphalos Demonium, "this is the place you call the Eye of Terror."
"Why?" gasped Uriel, tearing his gaze from the morbid sun. "Why here?"
"This is the end of your journey, the place where you will fulfill your oath."
"I do not understand."
"That matters not. The things you seek to destroy, the Demonculaba, are on this world, shuttered away in the darkness, far from the sight of man in a great fastness fashioned from madness and despair."
"Why would you bring us here?" demanded Uriel, a measure of his self-control returning. Why would a creature of chaos seek to aid us? The Omphalos Demonian laughed its booming, discordant laugh and said,
Because you are to do my bidding, Uriel Ventress.
Never, snapped Uriel. We would die before aiding a beast such as you.
Perhaps,
agreed the giant warrior.
But are you willing to sacrifice all that you have fought to protect by defying me? Everything you have sacrificed, and everyone you have bled to save will be washed away in an ocean of blood if you do.
You lie, growled Pausanias.
Foolish morsels! What need have I of lies? The architect of fate has lies enough for this universe. The Lord of Skulls demands no such pretenses. I know what you saw as you traveled the blood tracks. Your world afire, and your people dead. Ashes on the wind as it burned to death.
The Omphalos Demonium took a ponderous step towards them. Its billhook lowered to aim at Uriel's chest.
I can make that happen, it promised. All the splintered futures you saw can be shaped, and I can ensure that your precious home dies screaming in the flames. Do you believe that?
Uriel stared into the leprous yellow eyes of the demon, and knew with utter certainty that it could do the things it spoke of. Macragge destroyed. Ultramar gone. Yes, I believe you, he said at last. What would you have us do?
Uriel!
cried Pausanias. I do not believe we have a choice, my friend, said Uriel slowly.
Think of what you are saying, said Pausanias in disbelief. Whatever this bastard thing wants us to do can only be for evil. Who knows what we might unleash if we agree to do what it wants?
I know that, Pausanias. But what else can we do? Would you see Ultramar destroyed? The fortress of Hera brought to ruin?
No, of course not, but...
No, Pausanias, said Uriel evenly. Trust me. You have to trust me. Do you trust me?
You know I do, protested Pausanias. I trust you with my life, but this is madness.
Then trust me now, pressed Uriel. Pausanias opened his mouth to speak once more, but saw the look in Uriel's eyes and simply nodded curtly.
Very well, he said sadly. Good, hissed the Omphalos Demonium, reveling in their defeat. There is a fortress many leagues from here, high in the southern mountains, and its master has something deep in his most secret vault that belongs to me. You will retrieve it for me.
What is it? Asked Uriel.
It is the heart of blood, and that it is precious to me is all you need to know.
What does it look like? How will we recognize it?
The Omphalos Demonium chuckled. You will know it when you see it. Why do you need us for this? Demanded Pausanias. If it's so damned important, why the hell don't you just get it yourself?
The Omphalos Demonium was silent for a beat, then said,
I have seen you with it, and it is your destiny to do this. That is enough.
Uriel nodded, hearing a distant shrill cry on the air. The Omphalos Demonium heard the noise too, and cocked its head, turning and marching back to the rectangle of red light that led back into the demon engine in the hissing sarcomata. As it reached the shimmering doorway, it said,
The delirium spectres come. They hear the beat of your hearts, and their hunger tears at them. It would be wise not to be found by them.
Wait, said Uriel. But the Omphalos Demonium stepped through the doorway, and he watched helplessly as it faded and vanished from the mountainside, taking their demonic captor from sight. A leaden weight of despair settled on Uriel's soul as the Omphalos Demonium disappeared, and he dropped to his knees as he heard the cries of what sounded like a skirling chorus of air raid sirens. He looked into the dead sky and saw a flock of hybrid winged things flapping rhythmically on fleshy pinions towards them from the high peaks of the mountains. What the hell? Said Pausanias, squinting into the sky. The delirium spectres, said Uriel, scrambling over the ashen ground to retrieve his weapons.
What do we do?
said Pausanias, belting on his pistol and slinging his flamer over his shoulder. We run, said Uriel, as the madly screeching flock drew closer.